don't know if I could follow up on that. So, it's been a long journey for me for the last 18 to 24 months. And it's been pretty scary. And I love what Leah did talking about the overview. And I'm gonna talk about what she just talked about, but here at the local level. And what I've been trying to do, unsuccessfully. So, if you'll bear with me for a second, and I have some packets up here of the information that I have. And it has links to all the federal documents that I reference. So don't take my word for it. Matter of fact, from March until April, these are all the federal documents that I'm going to talk about that impact Fremont County. And I want to say this, I've been pounding this bandwagon since back in October at town hall meetings and so forth. If you look around this room, you're going to see Joel Highsmith, Mayor of Shoshone. You're going to see Pepper Ottman. You're going to see Tim Salazar. And you're going to see Sarah Penn and newcomer Tina. These are the only people that have showed up that are our representation here in Fremont County. These are the only people that have shown up to these meetings. I have had the opportunity to speak before the Fremont County Government Association, which is all the mayors. That man right there has been a big supporter of me. I cannot say anything about any other mayor in Fremont County. I don't have a county commissioner here, and I invited every one of them. I don't see Kel Case. I don't see Lloyd Larson. I don't see Amber Oakley. Where are they? I've been asking this question for almost a year. Where are they? They are our elected representatives. And they're not here. Tells me one thing. Aside from a few selected people in here, I have no representation. Neither do you. That needs to change. So, with that being said, sitting up here on this desk is 4 pages that goes through all the issues that I'm going to talk about with links to the federal documents. Go look at them yourselves. And so my little trip down this road started really back in 21. When I watched a lady by the name of Deb Holland, a Native American from New Mexico, get recommended as the Secretary of Interior over the Department of Interior. And I thought, well, that's cool. I got a bunch of tribal friends that are just as rabid conservative as I am. And they said, oh, you better watch her. I was like, what? So anyway, that happened on March 21st. On January 19th of 2022, the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Holland, addressed the Department of the Interior employees, for which she started off by saying, thank you, green social justice warriors. And I'm going, what the hell is that? And she went on to praise them for their social justice work in the past. She talked about how they were going to do great things in the future. And I started going, ooh, maybe this isn't the person that I want supporting me on the agricultural side. On September 14th of 2022, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, announced the USDA would investing up to $3.1 billion in 70 selected projects under the first pool of the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities funding. So I went and downloaded that document. Right here it is. And it's pretty interesting because it breaks it down by states. So I just went and pulled the state of Wyoming. And the first thing is measuring climate benefits and emissions of prescribed grazing and farming. And then it goes through and it breaks out who all their partners are in the state of Wyoming. A lot of universities are getting partnerships because they are the ones that are going to be put in charge of trying to track agricultural's climate emissions. And I thought the funniest one in here was the Farm Journal magazine. Got $40 million from the USDA. Why? To write positive articles on climate emissions as being applied to agriculture. That's here in the state of Wyoming. It's just pisses me off more every day. On August 16th, 2022, I kept thinking, how are they gonna fund this? Well, that was solved on August 16th when Joe Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which puts $789 billion into green energy and to fight climate change. That's where the funding comes from. $789 billion to put Mitch Benson out of business. I would have done it for a lot cheaper, to be honest with you. They didn't even talk to me. January 19th of 2023, the USDA mandates the use of electronic RFID ear tags. And so when I'm running around speaking about this, people are going, he's nuts. I even had people come up to me and go, you're radical. And I said, no, I'm pissed. And then I don't know if you noticed a month ago or so, in Riverton Ranger, front page, the USDA mandates RFID ear tags. The amount of people that came up to me and said, you're not nuts. I said, all you had to do is go read the Federal Register. And nobody wants to invest the time. One of the good things about it, and I was told by Harriet Hagman at her town hall meeting, was they'd gotten a stay on that. Well, they lost. Now, the worst thing about this RFID ear tag mandate is 2.5 years ago, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So March 30th, 2023, the Department of Interior releases a proposal to guide the balanced management of public lands, FLPMA. Now, FLPMA, there's 3 uses of federal land. Public grazing, minerals, oil and gas. Those are the 3 permitted uses. But when they came out on March 30th, 2023 with the draft of the new FLPMA, I went and downloaded it. I gotta quit doing that. It has really caused my wife heartaches. It created a 4th use, which is non-use. And they decided they had to put that at the same elevation as the 3 permitted uses of federal land to give it the same elevation. fourth classification is conservation, mitigation, single use. Where they can go out and look at Mitch Benson's BLM lease, and if the local bureau believes my lease is in need of restoration, they can yank it from me. And they move it over into the new fourth category, non-permitted use. They get it for 10 years. The only ones that are allowed to bid on it at a decreased value than what I pay for cows are improved environmentalist conservation organizations approved by Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland. They get it for 10 years.
Cool.
After those 10 years, if that land is still, and they don't have to do anything to it. After that 10 years, if that land is still needed restoration, they renew it for another 10 years. So they came out with that proposed document on March 30th of 2023. I read it. I should. April 3rd of 2023, the Bureau of Land Management publishes the revised, updated Federal Lands Policy Management Act. You guys heard anything about the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan? That was the first trial balloon of FLPMA. On May 10th, this is huge, and you can go watch it. The link goes to the video. Special U.S. Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry, issued an urgent call today for climate action. Advises the need to reach net zero. We must get agriculture on board, as agricultural contributes between 26 and 33% of all carbon emissions, depending on how you look at the numbers. His quote, unquote. He gave that speech to Tom Vilsack in the USDA, along with foreign counterparts that flew in to listen to this speech. Ireland, 2.5 years ago, their form of the USDA implemented RFID ear tags. And what happens with that, and right now underneath the mandate, was passed on January 19th, 2023. It gave the states and the tribes the option to opt out or opt in. But right now, that mandate applies only to cattle of 18 months of age or older moving across state lines. Now, a lot of people would say, well, you know, that's not a big deal. Let's say Mitch Benson wants to move his cows, wanted to move my cows to Montana to graze them. Underneath this mandate, the only legal identification for those cattle moving interstate is the RFID ear tag. My brand doesn't count. My ear tags don't count. The only thing that is legal verification is the RFID ear tag that if I wanted to take my cows to Montana this year, I would have had to sign up with the USDA. They would have given me a LID number that would have showed up on my RFID ear tags. I would have to give them the place of origin, which is my great-great-grandfather's farm out west of Kinnear. I would have to buy a wand, and I would have to pull every ear tag out of my cows and my calves and my bulls and replace them with a government-issued RFID ear tag. And I'd have to want every one of those cattle. I'd have to upload it to the USDA's website. They would know exactly how many cattle I own. They did this in Ireland. At the end of last year, the Irish farmers got a survey. And they're proposing it here in the United States for cattle moving across interstate lines. I would get another year-end government survey. I already get a ton of them. They want to know exactly what I grow, how much I grow, what my total land mass is. It's none of your damn business. Matter of fact, the last survey I filled out, I put 240 acres of pineapples. I'm done with them. But in Ireland, and so at the end of the year, they're proposing I will get a survey if I participate in this RFID mandate. I will get a year-end survey. They'll already have all of my cattle, because I had to upload them, had to want them and upload them to the USDA's website. They'll want to know how many consumable units I used of fertilizer, pesticides, oil, dyed diesel. They take all of those numbers, they put them into a pre-calculated formula, just like in Ireland, and they kick out a climate score for me. What they found in Ireland at the end of last year, and Harriet Hagman's talked about this, and I'm so thankful for her. Those Irish farmers got back their climate emissions score. They were above the average mean allowed for their size of operation. They slaughtered 200,000 head of dairy cattle last year. Because it was the only option those guys had to get their climate score down to the average mean. So, these are things that are impacting us. She talked about the global. I'm talking about what is impacting us. How many of you heard of natural asset companies? Yeah, she's heard a lot about them, my wife. January 17th of this year, one day before the Securities Exchange Commission was going to do a ruling on the creation of natural asset companies that was requested by the New York Stock Exchange, which is a self-regulated LLC company. One day before January 18th, the New York Stock Exchange rescinded their request to the Securities Exchange Commission to create natural asset companies. I learned about natural asset companies on roughly January 4th, when I heard that Secretary of State Chuck Gray, underneath Secretary of State letterhead, had written a letter to the Securities Exchange Commission lambasting the request by the New York Stock Exchange. So I went and downloaded his letter, right there on the Securities Exchange Commission's website. And I also downloaded the Secretary of Treasurer's letter from the state of Utah. Do you know that Wyoming would have lost between, I'm going to be like John Kerry, between 48 and 53% of our land mass to access? We would not have been able to access it. Utah would have lost 67% of their land mass to access. So then I got really curious after reading those two letters, and I went and downloaded went and downloaded the request. Right there it is. Whopping 31 pages. This lays it all out. The New York Stock Exchange had decided that they wanted to create natural asset companies. Those natural asset companies were all of our federal lands. And what they decided they had done, they say they had done, is they had classified all the ecosystems on our BLM land, our Forest Service land, our parks and services, all of the ecosystems. And then they grouped those ecosystems and created individual natural asset companies. And they wanted to trade those natural asset companies on the New York Stock Exchange to let both domestic and foreign investors purchase shares in those NACs to offset their carbon footprint. But in this wonderful document, they talk about how they will allow no extraction of any of the ecosystems contained in those natural asset companies. We would have lost ranching, grazing, mineral development, oil and gas. More importantly to most of Americans, you lost your hunting rights on federal lands. Because they will not allow any extraction of any of the ecosystems. And the ecosystems are from the micro soils to the sagebrush, to the wildflowers, to the horny toad, to the jackrabbit, the cottontail, the sage chicken, the elk, the deer, the coyote, and everything else that runs on that ecosystem. Not including the fisheries. It's amazing. But in here, they're very gracious because they talk about how this is going to have a huge impact to local communities that depend on those lands for their livelihood. You know what they propose in this document? That we can do ecotourism. Yeah. And I'm like, how? Will you do that with binoculars? How do you do that? If I can't drive out on it. So, anyway, May 22nd, 2023. I've been out running on the Wind River Reservation since 2020 with a bunch of great tribal ranchers because the Trump administration put money forth to the tribal game and fish so we could start rounding up feral horses running on the reservation. And so that's the funnest thing you can do with your clothes on. I tell you, that is horseback chasing horses into traps. Oh, it is so fun. It's incredible. I did that through 2020, 21, into 2022 as I started reading and staying up with this stuff. So I started telling my tribal friends, ranchers, like, man, you guys are screwed just like us. And they're like, nah, this is our reservation. I said, this is federal land held in trust for the use of the two tribes. The BIA, the BLM, the Bureau of Rec are all underneath Deb Haaland and the Department of Interior. While we have FLPMA on the non-tribal side, they have a very similar version on the BIA side because they're federal agencies that operate to the same management plan. So I started telling these guys about it, and first they were laughing at me. And then on May 5th, I started getting calls from my tribal rancher friends. And one family calls me uncle. And they're like, Uncle Mitch, you've got to come down here and meet with us at Tribal Grazing Committee meeting. I'm like, why would they let a white guy talk? And Dwayne's like, all they can do is ask you to leave. He says, but you know more about this than any of us. So I did. And I had the pleasure of John St. Clair sitting there, the BIA superintendent from Montana, Leslie Shakespeare was there. The reason they asked me to go is because of these two letters every tribal rancher got. These letters are from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, telling these tribal ranchers, and before I say this, if you go back to this Inflation Reduction Act, on the climate portion of $789 billion, what they talk about in that document, a lot, is wildlife habitat, maintaining wildlife habitat, because it has been so undervalued in fighting global climate change. So in this letter, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA is responsible for the management and oversight of trust land. Due to the feral horse population being uncontrolled and doing damage to our wildlife habitat, the agency will be providing AUMs, animal units per month, in range units, and we will be reducing those AUMs in 2024. We're going to reduce them again in 2025, and we may not renew tribal grazing permits in 2025. That reservation, when it was set up, when Chief Washakie signed the original treaty in 1863, do you know what that reservation was set up as? Agriculture. Agriculture-based reservation. Now you have the Department of Interior threatening tribal ranchers to remove their livestock because the damage the feral horse is doing to the habitat. So I brought this up at the tribal grazing meeting, and I asked John St. Clair, I said, who owns the horse? John St. Clair leaned back in his chair and he said, the people do. Tibbs Washakie stood up and said, then why did 10 years ago you told us we couldn't run them anymore if we own them? St. Clair did not reply to that. So then I asked John St. Clair, I said, if the people own the horse, who has legal jurisdiction over the horse? Shakespeare stood up and said the BIA. The interesting thing about it is, I sent these letters to Harriet Hagman's office last May. Here this June, I got an email back from Harriet's office with 2 attachments. The original letter she wrote to the director of the BIA in Washington, D.C., hammering him on why the BIA is threatening the tribal ranchers. And I got his letter. I got her letter that she sent to him in, I think she sent it at the end of May of last year, 1st of June. And the BIA director finally replied to her March 15th of this year. So I was asked to critique his response. That man is an idiot and he's a liar. For starters, he says they did 2 roundups in 2023. The first roundup was conducted in January of 2023. My ass. I had 4 feet of snow on my farm, and it was 49 degrees below. He was right that they did conduct a roundup in July, because they hired the Jamesons out of Utah to come in and gather these horses, where our governor contributed $500,000 and the BIA kicked in $600,000. And they took off 7,200 head of horses, I believe. But my point is, it's overwhelming to some extent. So on March of 2024, we're dealing with the Lower Wind River Conservation and the Natural Resource USDA on a head gate issue. And I'm told to go over and meet with Steve Lynn at the Bureau of Reclamation. And so I'm heavily into this stuff, so I go over there and meet him. Didn't know, that never met him before in my life, but I was told at one of the USDA meetings that he and I would get along very well. And we do. And so I was telling him about all this federal overreach. And he goes, Mitch, let me show you something. He hands me an 8.5 or 11 by 17 map that says Muddy Ridge Revocation Act. Who all knows about the Muddy Ridge Revocation Act? Few of us. And I will say this, kudos to our great news organizations in Fremont County, because I've been to every one of them. And I've asked them to do articles on these topics. None of them will. Muddy Ridge Revocation Act is from Muddy Ridge up above Tunnel Hill. It spans all the way to literally to Boyson. 67,000 consecutive acres. A total of 111,000 acres. And what people get confused about here is initially they were going to, it was going to be a Department of Interior land exchange between Bureau of Reclamation and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So I went to a town hall meeting out at North Portal, and everybody was up in arms. We don't want this to go to the Indians. I'm like, it's not going to the Indians. It's a federal land exchange. And I said, why would it go to the tribes when the BIA is threatening the tribal rancher to get their cows off tribal range units? I am convinced it is a way to divide Fremont County, plain and simple. But I will say this, those guys that are out there do have some very serious concerns because they have to get permits to drive through Bureau of Reclamation land. So there's some real land issues out there as far as value of land, but there's also the same value of land with FLTMA in the fourth non-use. Lava Ridge. Anybody heard about Lava Ridge? It's a 100,000 acre grazing allotment in Idaho. A couple months ago, they were told that they were going to lose 10,000 acres to wind and solar, single use. It's happening everywhere. Plain and simple. Just a couple more real quick topics for March 6, 2024. Securities Exchange, March 6th of this year. Securities Exchange Commission adopts rules to enhance and standardize climate-related disclosures for investors. April 6th of 2024, the Tennessee State Legislature passes Senate Bill 0479, striking down certain parts of Section 8 of the Uniform Commercial Code, which would allow too big of banks to fail and would sever the private property rights Mitch Benson has with my investments. Underneath this new code rule, they're wanting to take that from a private property for which I own my stocks, I own my investments. They want to sever that and make it a contractual relationship, which allows the world banks to pool all of our assets and allows them to reinvest those assets and keep the profit without our use. So there's a link to the Securities Exchange. You can read all about it. It's a wonderful way of robbing my pockets. I will say this, I sent it to Tim Salazar. It's a 59-minute clip of the Tennessee Legislature and the House bill they passed. I sent it to Sarah Penn, thank you very much. I sent it to Pepper, but I don't think she gets my texts. But Tim Salazar got a hold of the sponsor of the bill down in Tennessee, and he's gonna look at drafting up legislation to bring that before the Wyoming legislature. The neatest thing about what they did in Tennessee, passing that bill, is it protects the state assets, but also protects the citizens of Tennessee. 2020 of this year, I got invited to go to Governor Gordon's conservation sportsman seminar at the Du Bois Holiday, or Du Bois Military Museum. I wanted to ask the governor and the director of Wyoming Game and Fish, just when the hell did the state of Wyoming and our Wyoming Game and Fish secede our sovereign rights and team up with the United Nations and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the 2020 statewide habitat management plan for the state of Wyoming? We are teaming up with the UN to manage our statewide habitats through 2065. That document's also, that link is also listed here. It's 41 pages long. Climate change starts at page 17, and it'll make your blood boil. It made mine. April 18th of 2024, the Biden-Harris administration approves rule change on the Federal Land Policy Management Act called FLPMA. That was on a Thursday. On a Friday, they held a press conference, and the first thing they announced is they're shutting down all oil and gas development on the North Slope, devastating the Alaskan Native communities. Boom. Tell me she's compassionate about Native American people, or any people. May 24th of 2024, this is huge. This goes back to the UCC and the Tennessee legislature. The European Union executes a major international agreement requiring all companies that do international business with the European Union to agree to and sign ESG, environmental social governance, due diligence obligations. The EU adopts corporate due diligence directive for corporate sustainability. That means that every business, big business, Ford, GMC, you name it, that does business with the EU now has to adopt ESG due diligence requirements. And I'm a dumb guy. I went and downloaded the document. while it sounds good that it's only with the major corporate businesses doing business with the EU, they're gonna force all of their vendors to do the same thing. So, there's how it's hitting us locally. There's the global overview. I've been before our county commissioners 5 times. I have presented them with 6 copies of all of these federal documents. Underneath our Fremont County's Natural Resource Management Plan, that we have to do every 5 to 7 years. That document gets sent to the governor, gets sent to the BLM director for the state, Forest Service, Bureau of Rec, all of them even goes back to Washington, D.C. It tells how we in Fremont County are gonna manage our resources and what our plans are, how we're attached to land, the value of the land, our emotional, cultural heritage, spiritual, religious, all of them. But more importantly, it lays out our county commissioners' regulatory statutory rights and what they're supposed to do. So I made Muddy Ridge topic number 1 because I knew it was gonna happen this year. The second issue I made was the BIA sending out letters to tribal ranchers. The third topic was FLTMA's fourth permitted use, because I thought that was gonna actually take longer to get passed. After meeting with those representatives, I use that term loosely, providing them with the documents, giving them 30 days to review those documents, and then going back and asking for a commitment on them entering into cooperative agency status. Because there's a process there. We can't stop it, but we could delay it. I got them to commit on 1. And that was entering into a cooperative agency status on Muddy Ridge. I have asked them for that letter. Because the old county commissioner, Doug Thompson, who also attended in my behalf, thank God he's a smart man and he's a good man, stood up and said, you know what, this is settled law. So we don't need to go through the courts, we don't need to go through, it's settled law. And he was a county commissioner for 16 years, dealing primarily with the BLM and so forth. And Doug offered my assistance and his assistance in drafting up these cooperative agency status letters. Nobody's ever called me. I met before Tim Hancock and the city council back in February and addressed these issues. Do you think one city council member or Tim Hancock, who I've spoken in front of 3 or 4 times, do you think any of our representatives have said to me, Mitch, bring your documents in, let's go through them? Nope. You've got some rotten officials locally that are not being held accountable to their jobs. No, thank you.
Whose job is that?
You know, we've got a Fremont County government, our mayors.
No,
Our
whose
mayors-
job is it to hold them accountable?
You know, it's all of ours. And it's been a pretty lonely path, I will say that. I've gotten some great support from some representatives here, I really have. Do you know I know Fremont County farmers or ranchers, primarily ranchers, will get behind me? Because they run primarily on BLM land. They are scared to death of having any light shown on them. So I've had people ask me, how can you do it then? And I'm like, well, most of our ranch in Natrona is deeded, and a little bit of BLM. And I don't really give a shit. I'm pissed. It's not about Mitch Benson tomorrow. It's about what future is Chris and I's daughter gonna have that severely wants to come back and take over what we've built. It's about my grandchildren. It's about the other ranching families that their children want to take over their operations. And I've had a lot of those guys tell me, thank you for speaking, when we can't. I got nothing to lose. Nothing. And you know what? Everybody else in this room has nothing to lose either. Because this is coming. And it's coming fast. So, anyways, thank you.